I never imagined that our wedding night would end with me discovering a text from my husband's ex-girlfriend thanking him for canceling our Amalfi Coast honeymoon so he could help with her gallery opening. Even less could I have anticipated the look of absolute shock on Ryan Thompson's face 3 months later when I walked into that same gallery, not as his supportive wife, but as the newest investor who had just acquired controlling interest in the building that housed his ex's dream project. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But that moment, that perfect, crystal-clear moment of recognition as champagne glasses froze midway to lips, became the catalyst that not only reclaimed my self-respect, but transformed me from the accommodating wife everyone walked over into, the CEO who would revolutionize my family's 3-generation real estate business. "Emma, sweetheart, we need to talk," Ryan said, his voice carefully measured as he closed our bedroom door. The sound of wedding guests still celebrating on the terrace of his parents' Hamptons estate drifted through the windows, a surreal backdrop to what should have been the beginning of our honeymoon preparation. We'd been married exactly 7 hours. My wedding gown hung carefully on the closet door, ready to be preserved. Our suitcases waited by the door, packed for tomorrow's early flight to Italy. The Amalfi Coast honeymoon I'd been planning for a year, a perfect blend of Ryan's love for historic architecture and my passion for Mediterranean cuisine. "The Thompson Development Europe deal is moving faster than expected," he continued, loosening his tie in that deliberate way he had when delivering difficult news. "The partners need me in New York next week." I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my reception dress, the delicate beading catching the soft lamplight. "But our flight is tomorrow morning. The villa is reserved for 2 weeks. The private chef, the boat tours." Ryan sat beside me, taking my hand in what I'd come to recognize as his practiced gesture of reasoned persuasion. "I know, Em. I'm as disappointed as you are. But this is the Stuttgart project we've been working toward for months. The timing is just unfortunate." I wanted to believe him. After all, Thompson Development had been pursuing European expansion since before we met. It was Ryan's passion project within his family's prestigious firm. But something about his delivery felt rehearsed, too smooth, lacking the genuine disappointment I'd expect. "Can't your father handle it? Or Brendan?" I asked, referring to his ambitious younger brother who was always eager to prove himself to the Thompson patriarchs. Ryan's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dad, specifically, requested me. You know how important this is for my position in the company." The Thompson family business hierarchy was something I'd learned to navigate carefully during our 2-year relationship. 3 generations of real estate developers who had transformed skylines across the eastern seaboard, led by the formidable William Thompson, Ryan's grandfather, who still maintained tight control over major decisions despite his advanced age. "We can reschedule," Ryan offered, his thumb rubbing soothingly across my knuckles. "Maybe the Maldives in the fall. I know it's not the same, but I promise I'll make it up to you." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. After all, marriage was about compromise, about supporting each other's dreams and ambitions. Wasn't that what my mother had always told me? That sometimes loving someone meant putting their needs before your own? Besides, I understood ambition. My own family's business, Mitchell Properties, while not as prestigious as Thompson Development, had built a respectable portfolio of commercial real estate throughout Connecticut over 3 generations. My grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, had started with a single struggling office building during a time when women weren't taken seriously in real estate. My mother had expanded cautiously but steadily, and I had recently taken over as CEO after earning my MBA, with plans to modernize our approach. "Of course," I said finally. "The deal is important. We have our whole lives for the Amalfi Coast." Ryan's relief was palpable. He leaned in to kiss me, his cologne, the expensive one his mother had given him for the wedding, enveloping me. You're amazing, Emma. This is why I married you. No drama, just understanding. His words warmed me then, feeling like validation. Only later would I recognize them as something quite different. Appreciation, not for who I was, but for how convenient my accommodation made his life. After he left to rejoin the reception, promising to explain to his parents, I reached for my phone to start the disappointing process of canceling our carefully planned honeymoon. That's when I saw it. The notification from Ryan's phone automatically synced to mine through the shared calendar app we'd set up for wedding planning. A text message preview from a name I recognized all too well, Jessica Winters, Ryan's college girlfriend. The brilliant, temperamental artist he had dated for 3 years before meeting me. The one who had moved to Paris to pursue her career, just as Ryan was preparing to propose. The ex he claimed to have no contact with. Thanks for shifting things around for the gallery opening. It means everything to have you there. No one understands my vision like you do. Can't wait to see you next week. Jay. My stomach dropped as realization dawned. There was no urgent Stuttgart meeting. Ryan had canceled our honeymoon, to attend his ex-girlfriend's gallery opening in New York. I sat there in shocked silence, the distant sounds of celebration morphing into something almost mocking. The beautiful lace dress I'd changed into for our departure suddenly felt too tight, constricting around my ribs as I tried to breathe through the betrayal. I should have confronted him immediately. That's what the heroines do in movies. Storm out dramatically, champagne glass shattering, guests gasping. But I didn't. Instead, I carefully placed my phone down, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cool water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection stared back. Emma Mitchell Thompson, now part of the prestigious Thompson family, known for their strategic minds and careful planning. The accommodating, drama-free wife Ryan had just praised. The woman who understood business priorities and made sacrifices accordingly. But behind that carefully composed exterior, something shifted. A quiet clarity emerged through the hurt, a cool analytical perspective I'd inherited from my grandmother, but rarely applied to my personal life. Because this wasn't just about a canceled honeymoon or an ex-girlfriend. This was about patterns I had been ignoring for 2 years. The way Ryan's family obligations always took precedence over mine. How my business insights were appreciated but subtly dismissed. The careful molding of my wardrobe, my social circle, my vacation preferences to better align with Thompson standards. I dried my face, reapplied my makeup, and rejoined our wedding reception with a smile that revealed nothing of what I had discovered. I danced with my new father-in-law, chatted with Ryan's Princeton classmates, and thanked guests for their generous gifts. All while a plan began forming in my mind. Because Emma Mitchell, before she became Emma Thompson, had been steadily growing Mitchell Properties' portfolio for the past 5 years. I knew how to research properties, analyze finances, and recognize opportunity. And if there was one thing my grandmother had taught me, it was that the best business decisions often arise from personal insights. I didn't confront Ryan that night, nor the next morning when he left for his business meeting with a kiss on my forehead and another promise to make it up to me. Instead, I made a call to my assistant at Mitchell Properties. Olivia, I need everything you can find on a gallery in New York called Winter Visions. Owner Jessica Winters. Property details, lease terms, financial status, everything. But Mrs. Thompson, aren't you supposed to be leaving for Italy? Plans have changed, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. And Olivia? I'm still Ms. Mitchell professionally. Some things shouldn't change just because you get married. The first revelation came within hours. Winter Visions Gallery wasn't just Jessica's artistic dream. It was housed in a struggling converted warehouse in Chelsea that had been on the market for months, its owner desperate to sell after a series of failed ventures. The second revelation followed days later. Thompson Development had quietly been providing financing for Jessica's gallery operation through a subsidiary, a detail buried in financial statements, but clear to anyone who knew where to look. Mikey. Husband hadn't just lied about our honeymoon. He'd been financially supporting his ex-girlfriend's business venture, while consistently cautioning me about unnecessary expenditures when I proposed expansions for Mitchell Properties. A week into what should have been our Amalfi Coast honeymoon, I sat in my office overlooking downtown Hartford, the Mitchell Properties portfolio spreadsheets open on my computer, and made the decision that would change everything. Olivia. I called through the intercom. Contact Westbrook Financial. Tell them I'm ready to move forward with the Chelsea property acquisition. My grandmother had always maintained a separate investment account, independent from the main Mitchell Properties holdings, her opportunity fund for promising ventures that the more conservative board members might question. When she passed, away 2 years earlier, she had left that fund directly to me with a simple note: "For when you see what others miss." I had been saving it for the right moment. This, it seemed, was it. 3 months after my wedding day, Jessica Winter's gallery opening became the talk of New York's art scene. Her provocative installations exploring betrayal and rebirth attracted critics from major publications and collectors eager for the next big discovery. Thompson family connections had ensured attendance from the right people: old money, new, influencers, and key members of the city's cultural gatekeepers. Ryan had been in New York frequently during those months, always with valid business explanations that I no longer questioned. Our marriage had settled into a comfortable pattern of parallel lives. Him increasingly absorbed in Thompson Development's European expansion. Me focused on revitalizing Mitchell Properties with a surprisingly successful series of strategic acquisitions. If he noticed my new independence, my decreased interest in Thompson family gatherings, or my sudden enthusiasm for our separate professional lives, he didn't mention it. Perhaps he was too preoccupied with Jessica's triumphant return to the New York art world. Perhaps he simply appreciated my continued lack of drama. The gallery opening was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a crisp October evening. At precisely 7:30, I walked through the doors of Winter Vision's gallery in a deep emerald dress that had never been approved by the Thompson family stylist, my grandmother's vintage diamond earrings catching the strategic gallery lighting. The space was transformed, raw industrial elements softened by precise lighting design, Jessica's massive canvases and installations creating emotional focal points throughout the converted warehouse. Near the center of the main room stood Ryan, champagne flute in hand, laughing at something Jessica was saying, her dramatic black ensemble and signature red lipstick making her the embodiment of artistic intensity. I moved through the crowd unnoticed at first, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server, observing the dynamics of the room. William Thompson, Ryan's grandfather, holding court with major collectors. Barbara Thompson, Ryan's mother, charming, the critic from the Times. Brendan Thompson looking bored by the art but animated when discussing the property values in the rapidly developing neighborhood. It was Jessica who noticed me first, her animated explanation to Ryan faltering mid-sentence. Something in her expression, surprise transitioning to confusion, caused Ryan to turn, following her gaze until he saw me standing there. "Emma," he said, recovering quickly though his eyes betrayed his shock. I thought you had the charity gala in Hartford tonight." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I rescheduled," I replied with a smile. "I wouldn't miss Jessica's big night, especially given our company's investment in her success." Jessica's confusion deepened. "Your company?" I thought. "Mitchell Westbrook Holdings," I clarified, enjoying the flicker of uncertainty crossing Ryan's face. "We finalized the acquisition of this building last week. Didn't Ryan tell you? We're your new landlords." The gallery, which had been humming with conversations and appreciation, developed a pocket of silence around us that began to spread as the Thompson family members registered my presence and moved closer. "There must be some confusion," Ryan said, his voice lowered, his hand reaching for my elbow to guide me somewhere more private. "Thompson Development controls this property through Riverstone Management." I gently sidestepped his touch. "They did, until Westbrook Financial represented an anonymous buyer 3 weeks ago. Mitchell Properties then partnered with Westbrook to form Mitchell Westbrook Holdings specifically to manage this acquisition." I turned to Jessica, whose artistic composure was rapidly disintegrating. "I've been reviewing your lease agreement. We should discuss terms soon. There are some irregularities in the rental subsidies you've been receiving." William Thompson stepped forward then, his commanding presence honed through decades of business negotiations. At 82, he remained the strategic force behind the Thompson empire, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Emma," he said, my name carrying the weight of family authority in his voice. "This is hardly the venue for business discussions. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." I smiled, channeling the steady confidence my grandmother had displayed in countless boardrooms where men had underestimated her. "You're absolutely right, William. The venue deserves our focus tonight. Jessica's work is remarkable. Raw emotion, transformed into visual power. I particularly appreciate her installation on betrayal in the East Gallery." Barbara Thompson appeared at her husband's side, her social smile firmly in place, though her eyes had hardened. "Emma, darling, we had no idea you were interested in art property investments. Ryan mentioned you were focused on Mitchell's commercial office developments in Connecticut." "Diversification is essential for growth," I replied, echoing the phrase she had used countless times when explaining why my input on certain Thompson development decisions wasn't necessary. "Mitchell Properties is expanding our portfolio beyond conventional expectations." Ryan moved closer, his expression a complex mixture of confusion, irritation, and something that might have been dawning respect. "How did you even know about this property?" "The Chelsea acquisition wasn't public knowledge." "I pay attention," I said simply, "to opportunities, to patterns, to details people think aren't important." I met his eyes directly, like calendar notifications and text messages about gallery openings during honeymoons. Recognition flashed across his face, followed quickly by the realization of just how methodically I had moved since our wedding night. Jessica, perhaps sensing the undercurrents she didn't fully understand, attempted to reclaim control of her event. "I should check on the West Gallery installation. Ryan, perhaps you could introduce Emma to the Goldsteins. They were asking about emerging investment opportunities in arts patronage." "Actually," I said, "I should make my rounds as the new property owner. Several of your guests have expressed interest in similar venues, and Mitchell Westbrook Holdings is positioned to become a significant presence in the Arts District redevelopment." As I moved away to mingle with the influential attendees, many of whom were suddenly very interested in meeting the young woman who had orchestrated an acquisition right under Thompson Development's nose, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Not vindictive satisfaction, as I might have expected, but something cleaner and more profound. I had not just responded to a betrayal. I had reclaimed something essential that had been gradually eroding throughout my relationship with Ryan and his family: my identity as a businesswoman, as Eleanor Mitchell's granddaughter, as someone whose accommodation should not be mistaken for weakness. Later that evening, as the event wound down and the last collectors departed with promised follow-ups, Ryan found me examining one of Jessica's smaller pieces, a study in hidden structures beneath beautiful surfaces. "You could have just confronted me," he said quietly, no longer the smooth Thompson air, but a man recognizing he had severely underestimated his wife. "About the honeymoon, about Jessica. Was all this really necessary?" I considered the question, seriously turning from the artwork to face him directly. "It wasn't about punishing you, Ryan. That text message on our wedding night wasn't a momentary hurt to be addressed with an argument and an apology. It was a revelation about patterns I had been ignoring, how easily my business acumen was dismissed. While you financially supported Jessica's gallery, how my family's legacy was treated as quaint compared to the Thompson empire, how my accommodating nature was valued precisely because it required so little genuine partnership from you. He flinched slightly at the accuracy of the assessment. So this was what? A test? A power move to prove your business capabilities? No, I said, finding clarity even as I spoke the words. This was me recognizing an exceptional business opportunity that also happened to reveal exactly where I stand with the Thompson family. The building was undervalued, the location is appreciating rapidly, and the arts community presence aligns perfectly with Mitchell Properties' diversification strategy. That it happened to be Jessica's gallery was simply illuminating. Ryan ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, momentarily disheveling the perfect Thompson appearance. Where does this leave us? Our marriage? It was the first time in 3 months he had asked me a question without having already determined the answer he expected to hear. The first time, perhaps, he was seeing me clearly, not as the accommodating wife who fit conveniently into Thompson family plans, but as Emma Mitchell, CEO and strategist in her own right. That depends, I replied, removing my grandmother's diamond earring to examine it in the gallery light. On whether you're interested in an actual partnership or just a convenient arrangement. On whether the Thompson family can recognize that Mitchell Properties isn't just a quaint addition to their portfolio, but a separate entity with its own legacy and direction. On whether you canceled our honeymoon because of genuine business priorities or because Jessica's needs automatically outranked mine. For once, Ryan had no smooth response ready. The practiced Thompson charm gave way to something more genuine as he absorbed the fundamental shift in our dynamic. I underestimated you, he said finally. Yes, I agreed. You did. The question is whether you see that as a problem to be corrected or an opportunity to build something authentic. As we stood in the gallery his ex-girlfriend had created and my company now owned, surrounded by art exploring betrayal and rebirth, I felt a curious sense of gratitude for that devastating text message on my wedding night. It had awakened something dormant in me, not just anger or hurt, but a recognition of my own power that had been gradually diminished through 1,000 small accommodations. Whatever happened with Ryan and our marriage, reconciliation, renegotiation, or release, I had reclaimed something essential. Not just a building in Chelsea or business credibility in New York's competitive real estate market, but the clarity my grandmother had cultivated throughout her pioneering career. The understanding that true strength isn't about never being underestimated, but about what you build once you recognize your own value. The emerald dress I had chosen for that night caught the gallery lights as I turned to leave, its deep green reminiscent of new growth emerging after a necessary clearing. The perfect color, I thought, for what came next. Whether that was rebuilding, a marriage on equal terms, or cultivating new ground entirely on my own. The morning after Jessica's gallery opening, I woke in my Hartford apartment rather than the Thompson family brownstone where I'd been slowly relocating my belongings over the past 3 months. The distance wasn't just geographical. Each mile of highway between New York and Hartford represented a boundary I was finally establishing. My phone displayed 17 missed calls, 5 from Ryan, 3 from Barbara Thompson, 2 from William Thompson's assistant, and the rest from various Thompson family members or associates who had witnessed last night's revelation. I responded to none of them, instead calling Olivia to prepare for our 9:00 a.m. strategy meeting. The Thompson family attorneys have already reached out, she informed me, her voice betraying a mixture of anxiety and admiration. They're requesting all documentation related to the Mitchell Westbrook Holdings acquisition. As expected, I replied, selecting a tailored navy suit from my closet, the one my mother had given me when I took over as CEO, not the softer, more appropriate version Barbara Thompson had suggested for family business functions. Forward their requests to legal. And please ask James to prepare a complete timeline of the acquisition, highlighting that we acted entirely through proper channels with publicly available information. James Chen, Mitchell Properties' chief financial officer who had worked with my grandmother for 20 years, had initially questioned my interest in the Chelsea property. Art galleries are notoriously risky tenants, he had warned during our preliminary assessment. And this location, while promising, requires significant capital investment to maximize ROI. What he hadn't questioned was my authority to make the decision. Unlike the subtle undermining I'd experienced during Thompson development meetings, where my insights were noted with polite smiles then quietly set aside, Mitchell Properties had been built on a foundation of respectful collaboration. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just the properties she'd acquired, but the organizational culture she'd cultivated, one where ideas were evaluated on merit rather than who proposed them. I arrived at our downtown Hartford headquarters 15 minutes early, taking a moment to appreciate the building my grandmother had purchased in 1986 when everyone told her downtown real estate was a foolish investment. The lobby still featured her portrait beside my mother's, their expressions serious but with the same determined glint in their eyes that I now saw in my morning mirror. "Morning, Ms. Mitchell," called the security guard, deliberately using my maiden name as he had since my wedding, respecting my professional identity even as social convention expected me to fully embrace becoming a Thompson. Upstairs, the Mitchell Properties executive team had already assembled in the conference room. James Chen with his meticulous financial analyses, Diana Okafor, our razor-sharp head of legal, Martin Rivera, operations director whose institutional knowledge spanned 3 decades, and Olivia Park, officially my executive assistant, but effectively the organizational nexus who ensured our disparate departments functioned as a cohesive unit. "Before we begin," I announced once coffee had been distributed and pleasantries exchanged, "I want to address what many of you have undoubtedly heard through industry channels about last night's events in New York." Diana raised an eyebrow, her legal mind already calculating potential ramifications. "The Chelsea acquisition has become public knowledge sooner than anticipated?" "In a rather dramatic fashion," I confirmed, allowing myself a small smile. And, with particular relevance to my personal life, I provided a concise overview of the situation: the canceled honeymoon, the discovery about Jessica's gallery, and the culmination at last night's opening. I shared these details not as gossip, but as relevant context for the business decisions we now faced. "The Thompson family will likely pursue several angles to challenge our acquisition," I concluded. "They'll claim I used privileged information available through my marriage. They'll suggest conflicts of interest. They'll potentially attempt to leverage their banking relationships to create financing complications." James nodded, already scrolling through projections on his tablet. "Which is precisely why we structured the acquisition through Westbrook Financial and created the separate holding company. Your grandmother would be proud. It's exactly the kind of careful insulation she always built into sensitive acquisitions." "The documentation is impeccable," Diana confirmed. "All information used in the acquisition decision was publicly available through standard industry channels. That Ryan Thompson failed to secure the property despite having inside knowledge of its potential value actually strengthens our position." Martin leaned forward, his practical operations perspective cutting to the heart of the matter. "The real question isn't legal, it's strategic. What's our actual plan for the property? If this was purely a personal move—" "It wasn't," I interrupted firmly. "The Chelsea Arts District is experiencing precisely the kind of transition moment my grandmother taught me to recognize. Property values have temporarily plateaued after initial speculation, creating an acquisition window before the next appreciation cycle. The warehouse conversion quality is excellent, the location is prime, and the current anchor tenant, regardless of personal connections, has genuine cultural significance that enhances the property's profile." I activated the conference room, Display, bringing up the comprehensive development proposal I'd been refining since first learning about the property. Mitchell Westbrook Holdings will maintain the gallery as the cultural centerpiece while developing the remaining spaces for complementary creative businesses, design studios, boutique publishing, digital media production. We're not just acquiring real estate, we're cultivating an ecosystem. The strategy meeting evolved into a vibrant collaboration, each team member contributing expertise to refine the vision. Where Thompson development meetings had often felt like choreographed performances with predetermined outcomes, Mitchell Properties planning sessions were genuine explorations, sometimes messy, occasionally contentious, but always oriented toward finding the best path forward, rather than simply validating the highest-ranking person's preferences. By noon, we had established clear direction for the Chelsea property and contingency plans for likely Thompson countermoves. As the team filed out, Diana lingered, closing the conference room door once we were alone. "Emma," she said, dropping the professional formality we maintained during team meetings, "I need to ask, as both your attorney and someone who's known you since you were constructing Lego office buildings under your grandmother's desk, is your marriage over?" The directness of the question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. Diana had never been one to dance around difficult subjects, which was precisely why my grandmother had hired her straight out of law school 20 years earlier. "I don't know," I admitted, suddenly feeling the emotional weight I'd held at bay while focusing on business strategy. Last night was about reclaiming professional ground, not just responding to personal betrayal. Diana nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Your grandmother always said business decisions should stand on their own merits, regardless of personal circumstances. But she also recognized that pretending personal and professional realms don't influence each other is naive. What would she advise now?" I asked, genuinely curious about what Eleanor Mitchell would have made of my current situation. "She'd tell you that assets are evaluated not just on current performance but on growth potential," Diana replied without hesitation. "And that applies to partnerships as well as properties." The wisdom in that perspective stayed with me throughout the afternoon as I handled calls with investors, reviewed property management reports, and prepared for an upcoming City Planning Commission meeting. By early evening, I had finally gathered enough mental and emotional energy to address the accumulating messages from the Thompson family. I texted Ryan first. "I'll be at the Hartford house tonight if you want to talk." His response came immediately. "On my way." ETA 8:30. The Hartford house, a Victorian near Elizabeth Park that had been in my family for 2 generations, had been our primary residence during our engagement. After the wedding, we'd begun the process of relocating to New York, where the Thompson family influence was centered. The moving boxes in the hallway now seemed like physical manifestations of my graduated surrender of independence. Labeled, but not yet sealed, ready to be transported to a life where Emma Mitchell would be fully absorbed into the Thompson identity. I changed from my business suit into jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, clothes that belonged to neither my professional persona nor the curated Thompson wife image, but simply to me. In the kitchen, I prepared tea in my grandmother's cast iron pot, the familiar ritual grounding me for the conversation ahead. Ryan arrived precisely at 8:30, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His Thompson polish, always so carefully maintained in public, had abandoned him. His hair was unstyled, his shirt wrinkled, his expression caught between defensiveness and genuine distress. "You could have ruined Jessica's opening," he said immediately, revealing where his concerns truly lay. "All those critics, the collectors, if you'd exposed the gallery's financial situation—" "But I didn't," I interrupted calmly, pouring tea into 2 cups. "Because despite what you clearly believe, my actions weren't aimed at destroying Jessica's career or embarrassing you publicly. They were about recognizing a valuable business opportunity and reclaiming professional territory that had been systematically diminished." Ryan accepted the tea automatically, though he remained standing while I sat at the kitchen island. The dynamic was telling. He was poised for confrontation while I had settled in for honest conversation. Mitchell Properties had no business in Chelsea real estate or the arts district, he insisted. That's completely outside your traditional portfolio. According to whom? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. The Mitchell Properties investment strategy has always included diversification into emerging markets. My grandmother purchased 3 properties in Brooklyn when Thompson Development still considered anything outside Manhattan beneath consideration. That's different. Eleanor had decades of experience. You've only been CEO for 2 years, I finished for him, during which time our portfolio has expanded by 17% with an ROI exceeding market averages by 4 points. Yet somehow, when I proposed similar strategic acquisitions to Thompson Development regarding our shared European initiatives, my insights were deemed valuable perspective, but ultimately set aside. Ryan finally sat down, running a hand through his hair, in the gesture I recognized from moments when carefully constructed narratives began unraveling. Thompson Development has been successfully operating for 3 generations, I completed again, as has Mitchell Properties. The difference is that your family viewed mine as a quaint regional operation to be absorbed rather than a legitimate partner with complementary expertise. A silence settled between us, filled with unspoken recognitions. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice had lost the defensive edge. Why didn't you just tell me how you felt? About the honeymoon, about Jessica, about feeling dismissed in the business? The question seemed so genuinely perplexed that I had to laugh, though without malice. Ryan, I did, repeatedly. I expressed disappointment about the honeymoon. I questioned why my expansion proposals weren't being taken seriously. I even directly asked about your ongoing contact with Jessica 6 months ago, which you assured me was occasional professional consultation, nothing more. He had the grace to look uncomfortable at that reminder. That was complicated. No, I corrected gently. It wasn't complicated. It was a deliberate choice to maintain a relationship that mattered to you while hiding it from me. Just as it was a deliberate choice to frame my business insights as well-intentioned, but ultimately secondary to Thompson expertise. Ryan stared. Into his untouched tea, the Thompson air momentarily stripped of his carefully constructed confidence. I never thought of it that way. I was trying to protect you from unnecessary complications while helping you integrate into the Thompson approach to business. And therein lies our fundamental misunderstanding, I said, finding clarity even as I articulated it. I didn't marry you to be absorbed into the Thompson approach. I married you believing we were building a partnership between equals, personally and professionally. We are equals, he protested, though his tone lacked conviction. Are we? Would you have canceled your professional priorities for my personal request? Would your family have considered Mitchell Properties' approach to European expansion with genuine openness rather than polite dismissal? Would Jessica's gallery opening have been deemed less important than our honeymoon if the situations were reversed? His silence provided the answer I already knew. Our marriage had been built on a fundamental asymmetry that I had accepted through incremental compromises, each seeming reasonable in isolation, but collectively eroding my identity and influence. Where does this leave us? Ryan finally asked, echoing his question from the gallery, but with greater vulnerability now that we were away from public observation. I considered the question with the same analytical clarity I applied to property assessments, evaluating current value against future potential, weighing sunk costs against opportunity costs, distinguishing between recoverable setbacks and fundamental structural flaws. That depends on whether what happened represents fixable problems or reveals irreconcilable differences in how we view partnership, I replied, and that's not something I can determine alone or immediately. My family is pushing for damage. Control, Ryan admitted. Grandfather wants to negotiate buying out Mitchell Westbrook's position in the Chelsea property. Mother is concerned about social appearances if we separate so soon after the wedding. Dad is focused on potential business implications for the European expansion. The Thompson response was exactly as I would have predicted: pragmatic, strategic, concerned primarily with preserving assets and appearances rather than addressing underlying relationship dynamics. "And what do you want, Ryan?" I asked, focusing on him rather than his family's priorities. "Not what William or Barbara or Thompson Development wants. What do you want?" He looked genuinely startled by the question, as if the distinction between family expectations and personal desires was a novel concept. The hesitation in his response was more revealing than the words themselves. "I want us to work," he said finally. "I want to find a way forward that respects both our families' legacies without constant competition or scorekeeping." It was an honest answer, if incomplete. What remained unspoken was whether respecting both legacies meant genuinely equal partnership or simply more careful management of my integration into the Thompson framework. "Then we start with professional boundaries," I said decisively. "Mitchell Properties remains entirely independent from Thompson Development, with any collaborative projects structured as formal partnerships between equals rather than Thompson-led initiatives with Mitchell support. My role as CEO remains distinct from my identity as your wife, with business decisions evaluated on merit rather than relationship dynamics." Ryan nodded slowly, processing the implications. "And personally?" "That's more complicated," I acknowledged. "Trust has been damaged, not just by the honeymoon deception but by the pattern it revealed. Rebuilding requires genuine changes in how we communicate and prioritize each other's needs." "What about Jessica?" he asked, the question carrying layers of unresolved history. "That's for you to determine," I replied evenly. "I won't dictate who you can maintain friendships with, but transparency about those relationships is non-negotiable, and professional boundaries must be clear, particularly now that Mitchell Westbrook Holdings controls her gallery property." As our conversation continued into the night, neither resolving all issues nor dismissing reconciliation possibilities, I recognized that the true catalyst for change hadn't been the hurt of a canceled honeymoon, or even the discovery of ongoing contact with an ex-girlfriend. It had been my willingness to trust my own judgment enough to take decisive action, rather than seeking consensus or approval, to acquire the Chelsea property not as an emotional response, but as a strategic business decision that simultaneously reclaimed personal boundaries. By midnight, Ryan had returned to New York with our agreement to meet again in 3 days, after each of us had time to reflect on what meaningful changes would look like, rather than rushing to superficial resolution. As I walked through the quiet Hartford house afterward, I noticed something I'd overlooked earlier: how the partially packed moving boxes contained primarily items Barbara Thompson had deemed suitable for our New York life, while the objects that most represented my personal history and tastes remained unpacked, as if some part of me had resisted the complete absorption into Thompson identity all along. In my home office, my grandmother's photograph watched over the desk where I had first learned to analyze property portfolios and recognize opportunity patterns. I wondered what Eleanor Mitchell would make of current circumstances, not just the business maneuver, which I knew she would appreciate for its strategic elegance, but the personal recalibration it represented. Assets are evaluated not just on current performance but on growth potential, Diana had reminded me earlier, channeling my grandmother's wisdom. The question now was whether my marriage had the potential to grow into something fundamentally different from its original trajectory. Whether Ryan could truly see me as an equal partner rather than a complementary acquisition to the Thompson portfolio. The following morning brought a flurry of activity that temporarily pushed personal considerations aside. The financial press had picked up on Mitchell Westbrook Holdings' acquisition of the Chelsea property, with speculation about expansion into the New York market and the strategic implications for Thompson Development's traditional territory dominance. I arrived at the office to find James Chen already compiling response strategies for various scenarios. The Thompson attorneys have formally requested arbitration regarding the acquisition, he informed me, handing over a thick folder of documents. They're claiming you used privileged information obtained through marriage to undermine a planned Thompson development project. Exactly as expected, I noted, scanning the legal arguments, though they'll struggle to prove that claim, given that Thompson Development never formally pursued the property despite Ryan's clear awareness of its availability and Jessica's interest in the space. Diana entered with her own stack of documents. Their position is particularly weak given that we have documentation of Mitchell Properties' interest in arts district diversification predating your engagement to Ryan. Your grandmother's preliminary market analysis of creative sector real estate from 2018 provides excellent foundation for our strategic rationale. As the day progressed through strategy sessions, investor calls, and preparation for potential legal challenges, I noticed something unexpected. The Mitchell Properties team seemed energized rather than concerned by the confrontation with Thompson Development. There was a collective pride in standing firm against a larger competitor, in demonstrating that our regional operation could outmaneuver one of the industry's dominant players. The Chelsea acquisition is already attracting interest from other creative businesses, Martin reported during our afternoon update. 3 design studios and an independent publishing house have contacted us about available spaces in the building. The gallery controversy has actually accelerated awareness of the property's potential. By evening, the situation had escalated beyond business channels into society columns, with thinly veiled references to real estate dynasty drama, and honeymoon heartbreak transformed into property power play. Barbara Thompson had apparently been overheard at her regular Wednesday lunch explaining that I was experiencing understandable emotional adjustment to marriage responsibilities, and that the family was supportively guiding Emma through this challenging transition. The attempted narrative control was so predictable it almost made me smile. Where I saw strategic business decisions and legitimate boundary establishment, the Thompsons perceived emotional reactivity requiring careful management. Their inability to recognize my actions as calculated rather than impulsive revealed just how fundamentally they had underestimated me throughout my relationship with Ryan. Rather than responding to the social spin directly, I focused on reinforcing Mitchell Westbrook Holdings' legitimate business positioning. I authorized a press release announcing our arts district development strategy, highlighting the property's cultural significance and our commitment to supporting creative enterprises while maximizing value for investors. The statement was professionally impeccable, with no reference to personal connections or Thompson Development, a marked contrast to the emotionally framed narratives circulating through society channels. As the release was being distributed, I received an unexpected visitor at my Hartford office. Brendan Thompson, Ryan's younger brother, arrived unannounced and somewhat uncomfortably, eschewing his usual brash confidence for unprecedented awkwardness. "Emma?" he began after my assistant had shown him in. "I'm not here officially. The family doesn't know I've come." I gestured for him to sit, curious about this uncharacteristic independent action from the Thompson son who typically aligned himself carefully with family consensus. "What can I do for you, Brendan?" He fidgeted with his watch band, an expensive gift from William for his 30th birthday, before responding. "I wanted to say, that is, I think, what you did with the Chelsea property was brilliant. Of all possible openings, this was perhaps the last I would have predicted." "Thank you," I replied, maintaining professional composure while inwardly surprised, though I doubt that's the prevailing Thompson perspective. "It's not," he confirmed, with a short laugh. "Grandfather is furious, though he'd never show it publicly. Dad is strategizing legal countermoves. Mother is managing social damage control. And Ryan is..." He hesitated, clearly uncertain how much brotherly loyalty permitted him to reveal. "Confused?" I suggested. Hurt? Reconsidering relationship dynamics? All of the above, Brendan acknowledged. But also something else. Impressed, I think. Though he'd never admit it to the family. Or maybe even to himself. This assessment aligned with subtle shifts I'd noticed in Ryan's demeanor during our conversation. Moments when professional respect seemed to be emerging through personal hurt, albeit inconsistently. The thing is, Brendan continued, lowering his voice though we were alone in my office, no one has outmaneuvered the Thompson approach in years. Even our competitors follow predictable patterns that grandfather anticipates 3 moves ahead. But you... He gestured vaguely, searching for words. You changed the game entirely. I studied Brendan more carefully, noting nuances I'd previously overlooked. Though he projected the confident Thompson heir image in public, there were complexities beneath the surface, flashes of independent thinking constrained by family expectations, creative impulses channeled into acceptable Thompson pursuits. Why are you really here, Brendan? I asked directly. He met my gaze with unexpected candor. Because I'm tired of being the compliant Thompson who never quite measures up to Ryan's perfect execution of the family plan. Because I've had business. Ideas shot down for being insufficiently aligned with Thompson tradition, while watching you implement something bolder than I would have dared propose. Because... He hesitated before continuing more quietly. Because I'm wondering if there's a way to develop professional identity that isn't completely defined by the Thompson legacy. The vulnerability in his admission was striking given our previously formal relationship. Where I had seen only the archetypal younger Thompson son, there was apparently a more complex individual questioning the very dynamics I had recently confronted. Mitchell Properties is always open to collaborative ventures with innovative thinkers, I replied carefully, recognizing both opportunity and potential complication in this unexpected alliance. Regardless of family affiliation, Brendan's relief was visible, not at securing immediate partnership, but at having his questioning of Thompson orthodoxy taken seriously rather than dismissed. We spent the next hour discussing genuine business possibilities, his insights about creative sector, development proving more substantive than the superficial interest he typically displayed at family functions. After he left, I reflected on how the Chelsea acquisition had created ripple effects beyond my anticipated outcomes, not just in my marriage and the business relationship between Mitchell and Thompson Enterprises, but potentially in how individual, family members viewed their own capacity for independent action. That evening, I received a text from Ryan. Dinner tomorrow? Neutral territory, not Thompson or Mitchell associated. I agreed, suggesting a small Italian restaurant in West Hartford we had frequented during our early dating days, before Thompson family influence had redirected our social habits toward more prestigious venues. His immediate acceptance suggested a willingness to step outside established patterns that felt like tentative progress. As I prepared for bed in the Hartford house that now represented not failed relocation, but reclaimed independence, I realized that the emerald dress I'd worn to Jessica's gallery opening still hung on my closet door. In the dim light, its deep, green fabric reminded me of new growth emerging after necessary clearing, the perfect metaphor for what had occurred since discovering that wedding night text message. What had begun as painful betrayal had catalyzed something unexpected. Not just professional assertiveness or personal boundary establishment, but a fundamental recalibration of how I engaged with both business and relationships. The Mitchell Westbrook acquisition wasn't merely financial revenge or territorial marking. It was the first significant action taken entirely on my terms since gradually surrendering decision-making authority to Thompson preferences. Whether my marriage survived this transformation remained uncertain. What had become increasingly clear, however, was that regardless of personal outcome, I would no longer allow my professional identity to be diminished or my business instincts to be politely acknowledged, then disregarded. My grandmother had built Mitchell Properties from a single struggling property, into a respected regional enterprise during an era when women in real estate were routinely dismissed. She had maintained independence while establishing strategic partnerships, cultivated opportunity recognition as her primary competitive advantage, and never confused accommodation with weakness. Her legacy wasn't just the portfolio I now managed, but the principles that had guided its development. Principles I had temporarily set aside in my effort to be the perfect Thompson wife. The Chelsea acquisition represented recommitment to those principles rather than emotional reaction to personal hurt. It demonstrated that Eleanor Mitchell's granddaughter could recognize opportunity, execute strategic acquisition, and establish clear boundaries, capabilities that had always existed but had been gradually obscured beneath layers of Thompson expectation and my own willing accommodation. Whatever transpired with Ryan tomorrow, one truth had emerged with crystal clarity. The woman who would meet him at that neutral territory restaurant was fundamentally different from the accommodating bride whose honeymoon had been canceled 3 months earlier. Not because of hurt or anger or revenge, but because she had reclaimed the strategic confidence and independent judgment that had always been her most valuable inheritance. The Italian restaurant in West Hartford looked exactly as I remembered: warm, terracotta walls adorned with black and white photographs of Tuscany, the soft glow of copper pendant lights, and the rich aroma of garlic and basil permeating the intimate space. Antonio, the owner, greeted me with genuine warmth rather than the calculated deference that characterized our usual Thompson-approved dining establishments. "Emma, it has been too long," he exclaimed, embracing me with the familiarity of someone who had watched my relationship with Ryan evolve from early dating through engagement. "Your usual corner table is waiting." Our usual hadn't been usual for nearly 2 years, not since Barbara Thompson had gently suggested that authentic neighborhood restaurants, while charming, weren't appropriate for maintaining the social connections a Thompson wife should cultivate. Yet Antonio had preserved our preferred spot, a quiet corner with a small stained glass window that cast jewel-toned patterns across the white tablecloth when the afternoon sun hit just right. Ryan was already seated when I arrived, looking simultaneously familiar and strange. He wore neither his standard Thompson business attire nor the carefully casual weekend wear his mother had gradually curated for him. Instead, he'd chosen a simple blue Oxford shirt I'd given him for his birthday before our engagement, back when I still purchased gifts based on personal preference rather than Thompson appropriateness. "You look nice," he said as I took my seat, his voice lacking its usual polished confidence. "I mean, you always look nice, but tonight you look like myself?" I suggested, smoothing the simple black dress I'd chosen precisely because it had never been evaluated or adjusted by the Thompson family stylist. He nodded, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Yes, exactly like yourself." Antonio arrived with a bottle of Montepulciano, the same mid-priced wine we'd shared on our 3rd date when Ryan had confessed his secret appreciation for Italian cinema that his family dismissed as pretentious. Back then, that small revelation had seemed like treasured access to the real Ryan beneath the Thompson air facade. Only later would I recognize how rarely such glimpses occurred, how thoroughly the Thompson identity had subsumed individual preferences. "I ordered the arancini to start," Ryan said after Antonio departed. "You always loved them here." The gesture was telling, a deliberate return to known preferences rather than assumed expectations. Throughout our marriage, food choices had gradually shifted toward Thompson standards: French over Italian, seafood over pasta, elaborate presentation over rustic authenticity. This simple appetizer selection represented conscious effort to reconnect with earlier patterns. "Thank you," I said, appreciating the attempt while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for clear assessment. Brendan visited my office yesterday. Ryan's surprise was genuine. "Brendan? My brother Brendan? Without family direction?" "Very much without family direction," I confirmed, watching Ryan process this unexpected development. He was quite impressed by the Chelsea acquisition strategy. Ryan's expression cycled through confusion, slight betrayal, and finally reluctant admiration. Brendan has always been the family rebel, though he hides it well. What did he want? Professional perspective outside the Thompson framework, I replied simply. He has creative sector development ideas that don't align with traditional Thompson approaches. The Arancini arrived, their crisp exterior giving way to creamy risotto centers, exactly as I remembered from years ago. We both reached for one. Simultaneously, the familiar ritual momentarily bridging the complicated distance between us. "Emma," Ryan began after we'd eaten in silence for a moment, "I've been thinking about what you said, about partnership versus absorption, about equal consideration versus convenient accommodation." He hesitated, seeming to struggle with concepts that challenged fundamental Thompson frameworks. "I'm beginning to recognize patterns I never questioned before." "What patterns?" I asked, genuinely curious whether his recognition matched my experience. He considered carefully before responding. "How family decisions always supersede individual preferences. How relationship compromises consistently favor Thompson priorities. How alternative perspectives are acknowledged but rarely incorporated." He met my eyes directly. "How your business acumen was treated as theoretical while mine was considered practical, despite your track record demonstrating the opposite." This level of self-awareness surprised me. I had expected defensiveness or strategic concessions, not genuine reflection on systemic patterns. "What catalyzed this recognition?" I asked, suspecting the answer but needing to hear his perspective. "The Chelsea acquisition," he admitted. "Not just that you pursued it, but how you executed it, strategically, methodically, with perfect legal positioning. It forced me to confront the disconnect between how the family viewed your business capabilities and what you actually accomplished." He took a sip of wine, gathering thoughts before continuing. "And then there was Jessica's reaction when she realized you weren't there for revenge but for legitimate business purposes. She expected emotional confrontation. We all did. Instead, you demonstrated professional focus that had nothing to do with personal hurt." "The acquisition wasn't about Jessica," I clarified, "though discovering your ongoing financial support for her gallery while cautioning me about Mitchell Properties' expansion certainly illuminated contradictions in our relationship." Ryan had the grace to look genuinely uncomfortable. "I can see now how that appears. At the time, it seemed like separate domains, supporting Jessica's artistic vision versus Mitchell Properties' commercial development. The separation existed, only in perception, not reality," I noted. "Both involved financial decisions about business expansion. The difference was whose vision was deemed worthy of support." The main courses arrived, handmade pappardelle with wild mushroom ragu for me, the braised short rib Ryan had ordered on our first anniversary, another deliberate return to shared history rather than Thompson-approved selections. "I spoke with my grandfather yesterday," Ryan said after the waiter departed. "Not about us, about the Chelsea property. I expected the usual strategic planning, session for legal countermaneuvers. Instead, he asked a question that caught me completely off guard." "What question?" "He asked why I hadn't secured the property myself, given that I knew about Jessica's interest in the location and its potential value." Ryan shook his head, still processing the interaction. For the first time in my professional life, I had no Thompson-appropriate answer. The truth was so obvious in retrospect. I never considered that Jessica's artistic vision represented legitimate business opportunity. I viewed supporting her gallery as personal patronage, not strategic investment. The admission revealed more than Ryan likely intended about ingrained Thompson perspectives, the automatic categorization of certain ventures as business opportunities, while others were dismissed as personal indulgences, particularly when proposed by women. "William didn't appreciate that insight, I imagine," I said, well acquainted with my grandfather-in-law's limited tolerance for missed opportunities. He said nothing, which from grandfather constitutes severe disappointment. Then he asked another, unexpected question, whether I had recognized your business capabilities before our marriage. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. And your answer? I said I had been attracted to your intelligence and strategic thinking, Ryan replied, then sighed. He asked for specific examples of when I had incorporated your business insights into Thompson decisions. I couldn't provide any. The conversation paused as we both absorbed the significance of that realization. Ryan had been drawn to qualities he subsequently disregarded once our relationship formalized, unconsciously following Thompson patterns of appreciating competence in theory while dismissing it in practice when it came from sources outside established hierarchies. Emma, he said finally, meeting my gaze directly, I need to ask a difficult question. Was our entire relationship built on false premises? Did you marry Thompson expectations rather than the actual person? The question deserved honest consideration rather than reassuring deflection. I took a moment to reflect, tracing the evolution of our relationship from early connection through gradual accommodation. I married the Ryan I glimpsed during our early relationship, I answered carefully. The person who shared enthusiasm for architectural innovation, who valued my perspective on adaptive reuse projects, who appreciated the Mitchell Properties approach to community integration, the man who seemed genuinely interested in partnership rather than acquisition. I paused, choosing words precisely. That version of Ryan gradually disappeared, not suddenly, but incrementally, replaced by Thompson priorities and perspectives. I adapted accordingly, believing accommodation demonstrated commitment rather than recognizing it as systematic erasure of the very qualities that had initially connected us. Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing the assessment without defensiveness. And the man sitting here now? Who do you see across this table? It was a fair question, perhaps the most important one of the evening. I studied him carefully, looking beyond familiar features to subtle shifts in demeanor, in the way he engaged rather than performed the interaction. I see someone in transition, I replied honestly. Neither fully the Ryan who disappeared into why. Thompson expectations, nor completely the independent thinker who occasionally emerged in early conversations. I see potential for authentic connection, but also ingrained patterns that will require conscious effort to recognize and redirect. He accepted this nuanced assessment without protest, another departure from typical Thompson responses which tended toward binary categorizations. Success or failure, asset or liability, aligned or oppositional. What would genuine reconciliation require from your perspective? He asked, after we had both taken time to process the exchange. Professional autonomy without constant justification, I replied without hesitation. Mitchell Properties operates as an independent entity, not a subordinate extension of Thompson Development. My business decisions are respected rather than politely acknowledged, then redirected. Partnership opportunities are approached as collaborations between equals, not absorption opportunities. Ryan nodded, these terms clearly anticipated. And personally? This question required deeper consideration. Transparency about priorities and commitments. Recognition that accommodation should be mutual rather than unidirectional. Willingness to examine family patterns rather than automatically perpetuating them. I paused before adding the most challenging requirement. And complete clarity regarding your relationship with Jessica. He flinched slightly at the direct reference, though not with guilt so much as recognition of necessary confrontation. That situation is complicated. No, I corrected firmly. It's actually quite simple. Either she represents ongoing emotional attachment that compromises our marriage, or she's a business associate with clear professional boundaries. The complication arises from attempting to maintain deliberate ambiguity that serves your interests at my expense. Ryan stared into his wine glass, his reflection fragmenting across the deep ruby surface. Jessica and I share history and certain creative perspectives. For years, I've justified maintaining connection as supporting her artistic development, without honestly examining underlying motivations. This admission, delivered without defensive qualification, represented significant departure from previous Thompson communication patterns, where vulnerability was strategically deployed rather than genuinely expressed. What are those motivations? I pressed, needing clarity rather than comfortable ambiguity. Ryan met my gaze directly. Validation of an identity separate from Thompson expectations. Jessica always encouraged artistic and architectural interests. My family dismissed as impractical. Supporting her gallery maintained connection to possibilities I gradually surrendered to family obligations. The insight revealed layers I hadn't fully appreciated. How Ryan's relationship with Jessica represented not just personal history, but alternative identity beyond Thompson parameters. My husband had experienced his own version of gradual absorption, surrendering individual passions to family expectations long before our marriage. And now? I asked, recognizing parallels between our experiences despite vastly different starting positions. Now I'm questioning everything, he admitted. Thompson, development strategies I've implemented without examination. Professional identity built on family legacy rather than personal vision. A marriage that began with genuine connection but evolved into expected performance. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but leaving the possibility open. The Chelsea acquisition forced recognition that I've been operating from inherited scripts rather than authentic judgment. I don't want to continue that pattern, professionally or personally. As the dinner continued, our conversation shifted toward specific possibilities, how genuine partnership might function both in marriage and business collaboration, what boundaries were non-negotiable, what patterns required conscious redirection. We discussed practical challenges, including the Thompson family's likely resistance to recalibrated dynamics and the professional implications of publicly establishing independent identities while maintaining marital connection. By dessert, tiramisu shared between us just as on our first Valentine's Day, we had outlined preliminary framework for potential reconciliation. Not hollow promises or convenient accommodations, but substantive commitments to structural changes that would require significant effort from both sides. I'd like to propose an unusual approach, Ryan said as we finished our espresso. A 3-month trial separation, not moving toward divorce, but deliberately creating space for independent reflection and recalibration. The suggestion surprised me, particularly coming from Ryan rather than being initiated by me. Thompson family protocol typically prioritized appearance over authenticity, maintaining united front regardless of private reality. A separation, even framed as reflective rather than punitive, represented significant departure from expected crisis management. What would that involve practically? I asked, considering implications beyond immediate emotional response. I'd remain in New York, continuing Thompson development responsibilities while beginning some independent projects I've been contemplating, Ryan explained. You'd maintain your Hartford base with Mitchell Properties while developing the Chelsea acquisition. We'd meet weekly for structured conversation about both personal and professional evolution, evaluating progress toward genuine partnership rather than resigned accommodation. The approach demonstrated thoughtfulness I wouldn't have anticipated. Even days earlier, recognition that meaningful change required more than verbal agreement or temporary adjustment, that ingrained patterns needed conscious disruption to create space for authentic recalibration. What about the Thompson family? Response? I asked, well aware that Barbara would consider separation social catastrophe regardless of constructive intent. Ryan smiled, a genuine expression rather than his practiced Thompson charm. Surprisingly, grandfather supports the concept, though his reasoning is characteristically strategic. He believes Mitchell Properties has demonstrated value that shouldn't be alienated through hasty conflict resolution. He's particularly interested in your arts district development approach given emerging European market patterns. And your mother? Will be managed, he replied with newfound firmness. Her social concerns are valid from certain perspectives but not determinative of our decisions. This small declaration of independence from Barbara's social framework, something Ryan had previously accommodated without question, represented meaningful shift in relationship dynamics. Not dramatic rebellion, but quiet assertion of boundaries previously left undefended. After dinner, we walked together through Elizabeth Park, the autumn evening cool but not uncomfortable. The formal rose garden had finished summer blooming, transitioning toward dormancy while building strength for future growth, an apt metaphor for our current circumstances. I want you to know, Ryan said as we paused near the pond, that regardless of how our personal relationship evolves, I respect the business strategy you implemented with the Chelsea acquisition. It was brilliantly executed and legitimately valuable independent of our marriage situation. The professional acknowledgement mattered, not as substitute for personal reconciliation, but as recognition of capabilities previously underestimated. We continued walking, maintaining comfortable distance that allowed both connection and necessary space for reflection. There's something else you should know, I said as we approached my car. Mitchell Properties is proceeding with the European boutique hotel conversion project we discussed last year, the one Thompson development deemed insufficiently scalable despite favorable projections. Ryan nodded, absorbing this professional declaration without defensive response. That's exactly the kind of independent business decision our new framework needs to accommodate. Thompson Development may have alternative assessment of the opportunity, but Mitchell Properties operates from different strategic priorities with equal validity. We reached my car, the moment requiring definition, not quite marital parting, not fully resolved reconciliation, but intentional transition toward potential new equilibrium. 3 months of structured separation, I confirmed, establishing clear parameters. Weekly conversations about personal and professional evolution. No public drama or recruited allies. Genuine space for independent reflection while maintaining structured connection. Agreed, Ryan replied, his tone reflecting commitment rather than strategic concession. Starting tomorrow. We didn't kiss goodnight, the gesture seeming inappropriately performative given our current status. Instead, Ryan stepped back as I entered my car, offering space rather than expected intimacy. Another small indication of potential shift from habitual patterns toward conscious engagement. As I drove back to the Hartford house, I felt curious, lightness despite the evening's emotional complexity. Not the simplified relief of either definitive reconciliation or clean separation, but the authentic clarity of boundaries established and recognized. Whether our marriage ultimately strengthened through recalibration or concluded through mutual recognition of incompatible trajectories, the path forward would be navigated consciously rather than through accumulated accommodations and unexamined expectations. The following morning, I arrived at Mitchell Properties earlier than usual, energized despite limited sleep. The potential separation from Ryan created space for accelerated professional focus. Projects previously balanced against marriage considerations could now advance with undivided attention. You seem surprisingly positive for someone whose marital situation is reportedly under strategic reconsideration, Diana observed when she arrived for our scheduled legal review. The Hartford Business Journal had already published subtle reference to Thompson-Mitchell relationship adjustments, maintaining professional framing without social speculation. The separation was mutual and deliberately structured, I explained, sharing the framework Ryan and I had established. It creates space for authentic evolution rather than hastily negotiated compromise. Diana studied me carefully, her legal mind assessing both stated and unstated implications. And the Mitchell Westbrook Holdings expansion. Will relationship recalibration affect pending acquisitions? Quite the opposite, I replied, activating the conference room display to reveal comprehensive development strategy for the Chelsea property and potential complementary acquisitions. Professional boundaries establish Mitchell Properties as independent entity with distinct strategic vision, regardless of marital outcomes. Over the following days, this independent vision translated into accelerated implementation of previously constrained initiatives. The European boutique hotel project advanced from theoretical planning to active property assessment. The Chelsea Arts District development attracted additional creative sector tenants drawn by the property's sudden prominence. Mitchell Properties' renewable energy portfolio expansion, previously deemed unnecessarily progressive during Thompson collaborative discussions, proceeded with successful initial investments in emerging technologies. A week into our structured separation, I received unexpected call from William Thompson himself. Not through his assistant or family intermediary, but direct personal contact that bypassed established protocols. "Emma," he began without preamble, his voice carrying the distinctive authoritative tone honed through decades of business negotiations. "I'd like to discuss the Mitchell-Westbrook Arts Development approach, independent of family complications. Lunch tomorrow at the Hartford Club? Strictly professional conversation." The invitation represented significant departure from previous Thompson-Mitchell interactions, where my business perspective had been filtered through Ryan's representation rather than engaged directly. William's willingness to establish separate, professional relationship outside marital dynamics indicated fundamental shift in how Mitchell Properties' capabilities were being evaluated. "That would be acceptable," I replied, matching his directness rather than expressing surprise or gratitude for the recognition. 12:30 works with my schedule. The Hartford Club represented neutral territory, prestigious enough to satisfy Thompson standards while located in Mitchell geographical domain rather than Thompson territory. I arrived deliberately 5 minutes early, establishing subtle positioning advantage by already being seated in the main dining room when William made his characteristically prompt entrance. At 82, William Thompson remained imposing presence. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in custom English tailoring that projected understated authority rather than ostentatious wealth. Unlike his son and grandson, who had gradually absorbed Barbara's preference for social performance, William maintained singular focus on strategic outcomes regardless of superficial appearances. The Chelsea acquisition was exceptional, he stated after cursory greetings, dispensing with small talk in favor of direct engagement. Not just the property identification, but the execution methodology and financial structuring. Thompson Development would have approached differently, less effectively in retrospect. The frank admission of comparative weakness from William Thompson was unprecedented in my experience. Throughout my relationship with Ryan, William had maintained consistent positioning of Thompson methodologies as definitively superior across all contexts. "Mitchell Properties applies different strategic filters," I replied, neither minimizing the accomplishment nor amplifying its significance. "Opportunity assessment isn't universal but contextual to specific organizational priorities." William nodded, studying me with shrewd assessment that had evaluated countless negotiation partners over 7 decades of business development. "Ryan tells me you're proceeding with the European boutique hotel concept Thompson Development deemed insufficiently scalable last year." "We are," I confirmed. "Mitchell prioritizes portfolio diversification and cultural alignment over standardized scalability. Our projections indicate favorable returns despite smaller footprint than typical Thompson International ventures." "I'd like to see those projections," William said, the request framed as statement rather than question. "Not for Thompson Incorporation, but comparative methodological assessment. Your approach identified value in the Chelsea property that our standard filters overlooked. Similar insight might apply to European market evaluation." This represented fundamental recalibration in Thompson-Mitchell professional dynamics, acknowledgement that different assessment frameworks might yield complementary insights rather then competitive positioning where one approach must dominate the other. Throughout lunch, our conversation remained strictly professional, focusing on specific business strategies without reference to family dynamics or marital circumstances. William asked penetrating questions about Mitchell Properties' creative, sector development approach, offering occasional insights from Thompson Development's European market experience, without attempting to impose directional control. As coffee arrived, William finally referenced our personal connection, though in characteristically strategic terms. Ryan's structured separation proposal demonstrates unexpected maturity. Thompson's succession traditionally prioritizes uninterrupted lineage over individual development. His approach suggests alternative framework worth consideration. Coming from William, this qualified endorsement of Ryan's independence from Thompson tradition represented significant validation. Not emotional support for marital reconciliation, but professional recognition that established patterns might benefit from conscious recalibration rather than unexamined perpetuation. The separation creates space for authentic partnership development, rather than assumed integration, I noted, maintaining professional framing rather than personal vulnerability. Both Mitchell Properties and Thompson Development benefit from clarified boundaries regardless of marital outcome. William nodded, accepting the balanced perspective without pressing for emotional reassurance or family continuity guarantees. The Chelsea Gallery tenant, he said, shifting topics with characteristic directness. Jessica Winters. Her situation requires clear resolution for stable property value maintenance. The reference to Jessica acknowledged complex intersection of personal and professional complications without emotional dramatization. William's concern focused specifically on business implications rather than relationship dynamics. Whether Jessica's gallery represented stable anchor tenant given uncertain funding status following Thompson withdrawal. Mitchell Westbrook Holdings has established appropriate tenant parameters, I assured him. Ms. Winters' gallery will maintain primary position with adjusted financial structure that ensures operational stability independent of previous support arrangements. William accepted this assessment without further inquiry, recognizing established professional boundary rather than attempting to extract additional personal information. As lunch concluded, he offered unexpected proposal. Thompson Development is considering Mediterranean coastal property acquisition for potential resort development. Different from Mitchell's boutique concept, but potentially complementary. Perhaps parallel development with information sharing rather than integrated. Approach? Separate entities maintaining distinct operational methodologies while benefiting from complementary market insights. The proposal represented significant evolution in Thompson-Mitchell professional relationship, recognition of partnership potential without assumption of hierarchical integration, not Thompson directing Mitchell contribution, but separate organizations, implementing distinct approaches while maintaining structured information exchange. That framework has considerable merit, I acknowledged, appreciating the balanced positioning. Mitchell Properties would be open to exploring structured collaboration with clearly established boundaries and mutual benefit parameters. As William Biao departed with characteristic efficiency, I recognized that our lunch represented more than individual professional interaction. It established precedent for Thompson-Mitchell engagement independent of marital dynamics, foundation for potential business collaboration regardless of personal reconciliation outcomes. Over the following weeks, this separation between professional and personal spheres created space for authentic evolution in both domains. Ryan and I maintained our weekly conversation commitment, meeting at carefully selected neutral locations to discuss both relationship dynamics and professional developments without artificial integration or defensive isolation. Gradually, these structured interactions revealed emerging patterns that neither of us had fully anticipated. Ryan began exploring architectural interests long subordinated to Thompson development priorities, focusing on restoration projects that complemented his personal aesthetic rather than maximizing profit potential. I accelerated Mitchell Properties' community integration initiatives, expanding approaches my grandmother had pioneered, that Thompson frameworks typically dismissed as insufficiently profit-driven. 3 weeks into our separation, Ryan arrived. At our designated meeting place, a small contemporary art museum midway between Hartford and New York, with unexpected news. "I've recused myself from Thompson Development's response to Mitchell Westbrook Holdings," he announced as we walked through a minimalist sculpture exhibition. Grandfather supported the decision on ethical grounds, though Dad struggled with perceived loyalty implications. This professional boundary establishment represented meaningful shift from previous Thompson approach, where family loyalty superseded potential conflicts of interest through carefully constructed justifications. Ryan's willingness to create clear separation between personal relationship and business competition demonstrated evolving perspective on partnership requirements. "That's appropriate," I acknowledged, appreciating the boundary without excessive congratulation for basic ethical practice. "Have you made similar adjustments regarding Jessica's gallery situation?" The question addressed necessary clarification rather than emotional provocation. Throughout our separation, Jessica had remained ambiguous factor, neither completely severed from Ryan's professional orbit, nor clearly positioned within defined parameters. "I've terminated all financial involvement with Winter Visions," Ryan confirmed. "The gallery requires stable operational foundation rather than personalized support structures that create unstated obligations and expectations." This resolution represented important clarification, though questions remained about emotional dimensions underlying the professional relationship. As we continued through the exhibition, Ryan addressed these aspects without prompting. "Jessica represented connection to creative possibilities I gradually surrendered to Thompson expectations," he reflected, studying a particularly striking metal sculpture that balanced precariously on seemingly insufficient support. Supporting her work maintained illusion of artistic engagement, without requiring actual prioritization of those interests in my life choices. The insight demonstrated evolving self-awareness rather than strategic positioning, genuine recognition of patterns previously unexamined despite their significant impact on relationship dynamics. "And now?" I asked, curious about current perspective rather than historical explanation. "Now I'm attempting to integrate those interests directly rather than maintaining them through proxy support," Ryan replied. "I've enrolled in architectural preservation coursework at Columbia, not for Thompson application, but personal engagement with historically significant design principles." This concrete step toward authentic interest development rather than externalized support mechanisms represented meaningful evolution in Ryan's approach to personal identity formation. Not dramatic transformation, but incremental recalibration toward greater integration of individual interests within established professional framework. As our structured separation continued into its second month, similar patterns emerged through weekly conversations, gradual recognition of habitual accommodations, deliberate disruption of unexamined expectations, incremental establishment of authentic boundaries and interests previously subordinated to relationship maintenance or family tradition. The process wasn't linear or consistently positive. Some discussions revealed seemingly irreconcilable differences in fundamental values and priorities. Others illuminated unexpected areas of genuine alignment previously obscured by communication, patterns that prioritized harmony over clarity. Throughout these explorations, we maintained commitment to structured engagement rather than either premature reconciliation or defensive withdrawal. Meanwhile, Mitchell Properties continued implementing independent strategic initiatives without reference to Thompson approval or incorporation. The European boutique hotel project advanced from property acquisition to design development. The Chelsea Arts District property attracted additional creative sector tenants drawn by the gallery's continued prominence and Mitchell Westbrook Holdings' clear commitment to cultural ecosystem development rather than conventional profit maximization. William Thompson's proposed Mediterranean development collaboration proceeded through preliminary information sharing, with both organizations maintaining operational independence while benefiting from complementary market insights. This professional framework established potential model for ongoing Thompson-Mitchell engagement regardless of personal relationship outcomes. Recognition of distinct organizational identities with occasional strategic alignment, rather than assumed integration or hierarchical incorporation. 7 weeks into our separation, I received unexpected invitation from Barbara Thompson. Formal note requesting my presence at the annual Thompson Family Foundation Benefit Gala. Not as Ryan's wife or Thompson affiliate, but specifically as Emma Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Properties, whose innovative approach to urban development complements the foundation's community engagement priorities. The invitation represented significant recalibration in how Barbara positioned both me personally and Mitchell Properties professionally within her carefully maintained social ecosystem. Not absorption into Thompson identity, but recognition of distinct contribution with inherent value independent of marital connection. I accepted with appropriately formal response, recognizing the gesture's significance while maintaining necessary boundaries. The gala would provide opportunity to demonstrate evolved relationship parameters within public context, neither artificially integrated nor awkwardly estranged, but clearly established as independent entities with occasionally aligned interests. As I selected appropriate attire for the event, a sophisticated midnight blue gown that reflected personal aesthetic rather than Thompson-approved styling, I reflected on the journey from wedding night discovery to current circumstances. What had begun as painful betrayal had catalyzed fundamental recalibration across multiple domains: professional identity, marital expectations, family dynamics, and perhaps most importantly, internal recognition of authentic priorities previously subordinated to external expectations. The emerald dress I'd worn to Jessica's gallery opening still hung in my closet, symbolic reminder of transformation initiated through that pivotal moment. Not just assertion of property ownership or declaration of business capability, but reclamation of decision-making authority that had gradually eroded through accumulated accommodations, justified as relationship investment. Whether Ryan and I ultimately reconciled through genuinely recalibrated partnership or recognized fundamental incompatibility requiring formal separation, the essential shift had already occurred. Recognition that authentic connection required mutual recognition. Rather than unilateral adaptation, that genuine partnership emerged from clearly established boundaries rather than accumulated compromises. As our structured separation approached its final weeks, this clarity represented the most valuable outcome regardless of ultimate relationship status, not emotional catharsis or strategic advantage, but fundamental recalibration of how engagement occurred across both personal and professional domains. The canceled honeymoon that had initially triggered this transformation now seemed almost peripheral to the deeper patterns it had revealed. How easily autonomy could erode through incremental accommodations. How thoroughly external expectations could reshape internal priorities without conscious recognition. How completely professional capability could be undermined through personal relationship dynamics. Whatever came next, that recognition represented irreversible evolution, not return to previous patterns, but establishment of new engagement framework based on mutual recognition rather than unilateral adaptation. The ultimate payback for that, wedding night betrayal, wasn't property acquisition or professional validation, but fundamental reclamation of authentic identity previously surrendered through gradual, almost imperceptible compromises that collectively transformed partnership into absorption. The Thompson Family Foundation Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dender into a glittering wonderland that even the most jaded New York socialites found impressive. Ancient Egyptian architecture provided dramatic backdrop for Barbara Thompson's meticulously orchestrated philanthropy showcase, an event that functioned simultaneously as tax-deductible wealth celebration, strategic networking opportunity, and Thompson family status reinforcement. I arrived deliberately 7 minutes late, enough to avoid appearing overeager, yet not so tardy as to seem deliberately provocative. The midnight blue gown I'd selected moved with liquid grace as I navigated the entrance steps. Its understated elegance perfectly calibrated for the occasion, without surrendering to the ostentatious displays that characterize typical Thompson-approved attire. "Ms. Mitchell," the event coordinator greeted me, using my professional name rather than marital designation. A subtle but significant distinction I suspected came from specific instructions. "Mrs. Thompson mentioned you'd be attending. May I show you to the Mitchell Properties table?" This surprised me. I'd expected to be seated at the Thompson family table as Ryan's wife, regardless of our current separation status. The provision of dedicated Mitchell Properties placement represented unexpected recognition of distinct organizational identity rather than automatic family absorption. "That would be perfect," I replied, following her through the crowded gallery where New York's financial, cultural, and social elite mingled against the backdrop of 2,000-year-old Egyptian stonework illuminated by strategic lighting and contemporary floral arrangements. The Mitchell Properties table occupied favorable position near the central platform, yet clearly separate from the primary Thompson family seating. More surprisingly, I discovered Olivia, James, and Diana already in attendance. Key Mitchell executives who had never previously been included in Thompson Foundation events. "Emma," Diana greeted me with characteristic directness. "This invitation was unexpected. Barbara Thompson personally called to request Mitchell Properties' institutional presence rather than just your attendance." "Interesting evolution," I noted, taking my seat while scanning the room to locate Ryan among the Thompson contingent. He stood near the bar with Brendan, engaged in conversation with the Metropolitan Museum's Director of Development. Professional interaction rather than social performance. He wore his navy tuxedo with characteristic Thompson polish, though I noted subtle variations in styling that departed from his father's identical formal wear. Individual touches that would be imperceptible to casual observers but represented meaningful distinction from automatic family conformity. "The Chelsea acquisition has significantly altered how Thompson Development perceives Mitchell Properties," James observed, following my gaze toward Ryan. William Thompson requested quarterly financial projection comparisons from me directly rather than filtered through Thompson channels. Unprecedented direct engagement. Before I could respond, Barbara Thompson materialized beside our table, resplendent in champagne-colored couture and family diamonds that had graced Thompson women for 4 generations. Unlike her usual approach of sweeping entrance and immediate departure to more important guests, she settled gracefully into an empty chair at our table. "Emma, I'm delighted you could attend," she said, her social smile perfectly calibrated, "and Mitchell Properties' executive team as well. The Foundation truly values your organization's innovative approach to urban development." The performance was flawless, yet fundamentally different from previous interactions. Not patronizing inclusion of a daughter-in-law's quaint family business, but deliberate recognition of separate organizational entity with distinct value contribution. Barbara's social expertise had seamlessly adapted to evolving circumstances, recalibrating relative positioning without acknowledging previous hierarchical assumptions. "The Foundation's focus on community infrastructure aligns well with Mitchell Properties' development philosophy," I replied, matching her professional framing rather than referencing our complicated personal connection. "My grandmother established integrated approach to urban renewal that continues guiding our current initiatives." Eleanor Mitchell was remarkably prescient, Barbara acknowledged with apparent sincerity. Her community-centered development model anticipated trends that became mainstream decades later. The Foundation's new urban grant program draws inspiration from similar principles. This genuine professional recognition, not strategic flattery but substantive acknowledgement of Mitchell Properties' methodological contributions, represented significant evolution in how the Thompson family positioned our organization within their operational worldview. After appropriate conversational exchange, Barbara departed to continue her meticulous hostess circuit, leaving our table to analyze this unexpected engagement. "Remarkable recalibration," Diana murmured once Barbara was safely beyond earshot. "3 months ago, she introduced you at the Metropolitan Opera fundraiser as Ryan's wife who manages her family's charming Connecticut real estate interests. Tonight, you're Emma Mitchell, CEO of an innovative urban development organization whose approach influences Thompson Foundation initiatives. The Chelsea acquisition altered fundamental perception dynamics," I agreed, tracking Barbara's progress through the crowd. "Not through confrontational positioning, but strategic value demonstration. Mitchell Properties established clear boundaries through substantive action rather than defensive declaration." As dinner service began, William Thompson approached our table rather than immediately taking his seat at the central Thompson position, another departure from established protocol that prioritized family positioning above individual engagement. "Emma," he greeted me with characteristic economy, "the Mediterranean information exchange has yielded unexpected comparative advantages. Perhaps you and your team might join a focused discussion afterward. 15 minutes in the trustees' room would suffice." The invitation represented further evolution in Thompson-Mitchell professional dynamics, not ceremonial inclusion in family philanthropy, but substantive business engagement regarding specific strategic initiatives. "That would be productive," I agreed, maintaining professional framing. "We've developed preliminary analysis of potential complementary positioning between our respective Mediterranean projects." William nodded with approval at the focused response, then departed without unnecessary social extension, his characteristic interaction style regardless of context. As he rejoined the central Thompson table, Ryan caught my eye from across the room, offering subtle nod that acknowledged the significance of his grandfather's direct engagement without overemphasizing its importance. Throughout dinner, I observed Barbara's masterful orchestration of social dynamics. She had reframed our separation not as family disruption requiring damage control, but as sophisticated evolution in business partnership requiring appropriate recalibration. The narrative she presented through carefully managed interactions positioned both Ryan and me as mature professionals implementing strategic relationship assessment rather than emotional reactivity, a framing that preserved Thompson dignity while accommodating undeniable circumstances. After the foundation director's presentation and obligatory celebrity musical performance, guests dispersed throughout the Temple of Dender for dessert and continued networking. I made my way toward the designated trustees' room for the Mediterranean project discussion, pausing occasionally for brief professional exchanges with various attendees who now approached me directly rather than through Thompson introduction. Mitchell Properties Arts District development has attracted significant attention, noted a prominent museum board member. The integration of cultural programming with commercial viability offers compelling alternative to standard gentrification patterns. The Chelsea execution was particularly noteworthy, added a real estate investment director who had previously engaged exclusively with Thompson Development. The acquisition timing demonstrated impressive market anticipation. These direct professional acknowledgments, not derivative recognition as Thompson affiliate, but substantive engagement with Mitchell Properties' strategic approach, confirmed the fundamental shift in positioning that had occurred since the Chelsea acquisition, not through aggressive self-promotion or confrontational boundary assertion, but through demonstrated capability that required recognition regardless of previous hierarchical assumptions. Ryan intercepted me near the temple's reflecting pool, the ancient stonework creating dramatic backdrop for our first public interaction since implementing structured separation. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the compliment offered as genuine observation rather than obligatory husband comment. The Mediterranean discussion should be interesting. Grandfather has reviewed Mitchell's boutique concept with unexpected enthusiasm. The approaches are complementary rather than competitive, I noted, maintaining professional focus while acknowledging personal connection through relaxed demeanor. Different target demographics within shared geographic distribution. Ryan nodded, studying me with thoughtful assessment rather than possessive familiarity. You seem centered, professionally and personally. The separation created necessary space for recalibration, I acknowledged, both individually and in potential partnership dynamics. Before he could respond, Brendan approached with uncharacteristic professional focus rather than his typical social performance. Emma, grandfather is ready for the Mediterranean discussion whenever your team is available. He glanced between us with perceptive assessment. Unless this is a bad time? Not at all, I assured him. Ryan and I were just discussing complementary, positioning potential between our respective Mediterranean initiatives. The professional framing established appropriate boundaries without awkward pretense of complete separation. Ryan offered supportive nod before departing to rejoin a conversation with the museum's architectural preservation director. Genuine engagement with personal interest rather than obligatory Thompson networking. The trustees' room provided elegant contrast to the gala's public spectacle, understated luxury designed for substantive discussion rather than social impression. William Thompson had assembled small group including key Thompson development executives and Mediterranean project specialists. Notably absent was Howard Thompson, Ryan's father, whose traditional role would have included oversight of international development initiatives. Mitchell Properties' boutique hotel approach offers intriguing alternative to standard luxury resort positioning. William began without preliminary social exchange. Your team's analysis of cultural integration opportunities particularly merits consideration for certain Thompson Mediterranean acquisitions. The discussion that followed demonstrated remarkable evolution in Thompson-Mitchell professional dynamics. Rather than hierarchical assessment where Thompson frameworks automatically superseded Mitchell approaches, the conversation explored complementary methodologies with recognition of distinct strategic priorities and operational strengths. James presented Mitchell Properties' boutique concept with confident authority, receiving substantive engagement from Thompson executives without condescending adjustment or strategic redirection. Diana addressed potential collaborative structures that maintained organizational independence while facilitating information exchange and occasional resource alignment. Throughout the discussion, I observed William's assessment of our team, not evaluating absorption potential, but genuinely considering partnership dynamics between distinct organizations with complementary capabilities. His questions focused on specific methodological differences rather than establishing hierarchical positioning, demonstrating unexpected openness to alternative approaches despite decades of Thompson orthodoxy. As the meeting concluded with agreement for follow-up session involving technical teams from both organizations, William requested brief private conversation. The others departed, leaving us alone in the trustees' room surrounded by priceless artifacts from the museum's collection, tangible reminders of enduring value beyond temporary circumstances. Howard disagrees with this approach, William stated without preamble once the door closed. He believes Thompson development should accelerate European expansion independently, rather than establishing collaborative framework with Mitchell Properties. The direct acknowledgement of internal Thompson disagreement represented remarkable departure from previous United Front positioning. William had never previously revealed family strategic differences to outside parties, maintaining consistent narrative of Thompson consensus regardless of private dissent. That perspective has legitimate strategic foundation, I acknowledged, respecting the alternative position without surrendering to its implications. Thompson Development's traditional approach prioritizes comprehensive control rather than collaborative alignment. William nodded, appreciating the balanced assessment. 70 years of business development establishes certain operational frameworks that resist recalibration despite potential advantages in specific contexts. He studied a nearby Egyptian sculpture with contemplative focus. Ryan's structured separation proposal reflected similar recognition that established patterns require deliberate disruption to permit meaningful reassessment. This parallel between business methodology and personal relationship dynamics created opening for more direct conversation about our current circumstances, though William maintained characteristic professional framing. Mitchell Properties has demonstrated exceptional capability through the Chelsea execution and subsequent Arts District development, he continued. Not simply acquisition strategy, but comprehensive vision implementation. Thompson Development would benefit from complementary methodology in specific contexts without requiring organizational absorption. The business assessment carried obvious implications for personal relationship dynamics. Recognition that partnership required mutual respect for distinct approaches, rather than hierarchical integration, where one framework automatically superseded the other. Complementary capability creates sustainable value through balanced engagement, I agreed, addressing both business and personal dimensions through carefully calibrated response. Mitchell Properties maintains distinct operational identity while acknowledging potential strategic alignment in specific contexts. William's assessment shifted from the Egyptian artifact to direct engagement. Ryan has demonstrated unexpected capacity for independent perspective in recent weeks. His architectural preservation interests represent meaningful departure from established Thompson development priorities. His expression remained unreadable, though his tone carried subtle approval. Authentic partnership requires balanced recognition rather than unilateral adaptation. This philosophical observation, addressing both business methodology and personal relationship dynamics, represented William's closest approach to direct commentary on our marriage situation. Not emotional engagement or reconciliation pressure, but strategic assessment of fundamental partnership requirements regardless of specific application context. Balance emerges from clearly established boundaries rather than accumulated compromises, I noted, completing the parallel framework. In both organizational alignment and personal connection, William nodded with evident approval of the balanced perspective. The Thompson Family Foundation would welcome Mitchell Properties' continued engagement regardless of personal circumstances, he stated, establishing clear separation between professional collaboration and marriage dynamics. Your grandmother's development approach offers valuable counterpoint to traditional Thompson methodologies in specific application contexts. As we rejoined the gala, I reflected on this remarkable evolution in Thompson-Mitchell positioning, from assumed hierarchical integration to recognized complementary capability, not through confrontational boundary assertion or emotional ultimatum, but through demonstrated value that required acknowledgement, regardless of previous relational frameworks. Ryan approached as I emerged from the trustees' room, his expression reflecting genuine interest rather than possessive monitoring. Productive discussion? Surprisingly so, I confirmed. Your grandfather has remarkable capacity for methodological reassessment despite established operational patterns. 7 decades of successful business development create certain foundational perspectives, Ryan acknowledged. But grandfather has always prioritized effective outcomes over ideological consistency, despite appearances to the contrary. This insight into William's operational philosophy, recognizing flexibility beneath apparent rigidity, suggested inherited capacity for adaptation that Ryan had perhaps underutilized in previous circumstances. Before I could respond, Barbara appeared with characteristic perfect timing. Emma, the Metropolitan's development director, is particularly interested in Mitchell Properties' Arts District approach, she explained, her social orchestration flawless despite complicated circumstances. Might you join that conversation briefly? They're discussing potential adaptive reuse of several museum-adjacent properties. The request represented legitimate professional opportunity rather than social manipulation, recognition of Mitchell Properties' relevant expertise rather than obligatory inclusion of Thompson's spouse. Ryan offered encouraging nod as I departed with Barbara, his expression reflecting genuine support for professional engagement rather than possessive monitoring. Throughout the remainder of the evening, I navigated series of substantive business Conversations interspersed with inevitable social exchanges. Unlike previous Thompson events where I'd been positioned primarily as Ryan's wife with secondary acknowledgement of business capability, the current dynamic established clear professional identity independent of marital connection. As the gala concluded, Ryan and I found ourselves momentarily alone near the coat check, the evening's carefully managed separate orbits briefly intersecting. "Our structured separation concludes next week," he noted, referring to our 3-month agreement rather than the evening's social navigation. "Perhaps dinner Wednesday to discuss what comes next? The Italian place in West Hartford again?" The suggestion maintained our established neutral territory approach while acknowledging upcoming decision point regarding future relationship parameters. Not pressure for specific outcome, but recognition of necessary structured assessment after completed reflection period. "Wednesday works," I agreed, accepting my wrap from the attendant. 7 o'clock? Ryan nodded, maintaining appropriate distance despite the intimate conversation topic. "I've been reflecting on what genuine partnership requires, professionally and personally. Not theoretical recalibration, but substantive behavior adjustment, based on recognized patterns. This focus on specific behavior changes rather than generalized intentions represented meaningful evolution in Ryan's approach to relationship dynamics. Not emotional declarations or strategic concessions, but practical recognition of necessary adjustments to established patterns. That's the essential question," I acknowledged. "Whether recognized patterns can translate into sustainable changes, rather than temporary accommodations that gradually revert to established frameworks." As we exited the museum, Ryan paused on the impressive stone steps overlooking Fifth Avenue. The autumn night had turned unexpectedly clear, rare stars visible despite Manhattan's perpetual glow. "Whatever happens next week," he said quietly, "I want to thank you for the Chelsea acquisition. Not just as brilliant business execution, but as necessary catalyst for fundamental reassessment." His expression reflected genuine recognition rather than strategic positioning. Without that decisive action, we would have continued accumulating compromises until authentic connection disappeared entirely beneath accommodation patterns. The acknowledgement validated not just the business strategy, but the underlying recalibration it had initiated. Recognition that what had initially appeared as confrontational boundary assertion had actually created essential space for honest relationship assessment. "Sometimes clear disruption is necessary for authentic evolution," I noted as my car arrived. "In both business methodology and personal dynamics." We exchanged brief farewell without unnecessary physical contact or emotional performance. Not cold distance, but appropriate space for continued reflection as our structured separation approached its predetermined conclusion. As my car navigated away from the Metropolitan Museum toward temporary Manhattan accommodations, I reflected on the evening's remarkable demonstrations of recalibrated positioning, Barbara's masterful social orchestration, William's direct professional engagement, Ryan's balanced personal interaction. All reflected significant evolution from previous hierarchical frameworks toward more balanced recognition of distinct identity and capability. Whether our marriage ultimately continued through genuinely recalibrated partnership or concluded through mutual recognition of fundamental incompatibility, the essential transformation had already occurred. Mitchell Properties had established clear organizational boundaries that would persist regardless of personal relationship status. My professional identity had secured recognition independent of marital connection. The reflexive accommodation, patterns that had gradually eroded authentic engagement, had been disrupted through deliberate separation and conscious reassessment. The midnight blue gown I'd selected for the evening represented this evolved positioning. Neither deliberate rejection of Thompson aesthetics nor careful conformity to established expectations, but authentic expression of personal preference within appropriate contextual parameters. Not reactive boundary assertion, but confident identity expression that required neither defensive justification nor apologetic accommodation. As the car turned onto Park Avenue, I noticed Jessica Winters emerging from a gallery opening several blocks from the Metropolitan Museum. She walked alone, her dramatic black ensemble complementing her signature artistic persona as she hailed passing taxi. Our paths didn't cross directly, yet the momentary observation reinforced how thoroughly circumstances had evolved since discovering that wedding night text message. Jessica no longer represented painful betrayal or threatened connection, but simply another arts professional navigating New York's competitive cultural landscape. Her gallery now operated under Mitchell Westbrook Holdings property management with appropriate tenant parameters and transparent financial structure. Her relationship with Ryan had apparently transitioned toward clearly defined boundaries rather than ambiguous emotional territory. This normalization of previously charged dynamics reflected the broader recalibration that had occurred across multiple domains. Professional identity established independent of personal relationship, business capability recognized regardless of marital connection, authentic partnership potential assessed through deliberate reflection rather than accumulated accommodations. Whatever decision emerged from next week's concluding conversation with Ryan, the fundamental transformation had already occurred. Not dramatic confrontation or emotional ultimatum, but quiet revolution in how engagement occurred across both personal and professional contexts. Recognition that sustainable connection required genuine respect for distinct identity rather than gradual absorption into dominant framework. As I arrived at my temporary Manhattan residence, I realized that the canceled honeymoon that had initially triggered this evolution now seemed almost inconsequential compared to the fundamental patterns it had revealed. The specific betrayal mattered less than the systemic accommodation it had illuminated. How easily authentic identity could erode through incremental compromises justified as relationship investment. The ultimate outcome of our structured separation remained uncertain as I prepared for Wednesday's conversation. Yet regardless of whether reconciliation or separation followed, the essential recalibration had been accomplished. Establishment of clear boundaries, recognition of distinct identity, and fundamental reassessment of what genuine partnership required beyond accumulated compromises and strategic accommodations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.